Welcome back, everyone, to Cover, the show where we explore all things literature, from diving into the forgotten process of book creation to reviewing this season's hottest books. I'm your host, Natalia Keza, and today we're going to be talking about something a little different: literary translation. The concepts translators have to think about, and how understanding this process can help us become better readers. I hope you enjoy today's episode. Let's get into it. I'm sure when many of you hear the word translation, you immediately think of a physical translator, someone who's mediating a conversation between two individuals that speak two different languages. Although this technically falls more under interpretation, and as long as there have been people speaking in different languages, this struggle to connect across a barrier has existed. The delicacy of preserving what an individual is saying while expressing it with such a level of nuance in a quick and efficient way truly is a tall order. And although this interpretation is an important part of communication and a very real form of translation, today we're going to be talking about it in a slightly different context, one that you probably don't think about a lot: the process of how a novel makes its way from one language to another. Let's start with a little exercise. I want you to think about a literary work that's had a massive impact on the history of humanity. Take a moment to think about all the books in the world that have ever been written. Which one would you choose? I know that's a really broad question, but what comes to my mind is religious text, the Bible. Imagine having to translate the words of God, the implications and influence a translator holds in this situation. Now think about how many times the work has been translated throughout history and how many different individual books there are, the slightly different cultures they originated from, all of this while maintaining a collective, coherent voice. It's truly crazy to conceptualize. There are approximately 7,400 languages spoken in some form in the world today, and about 4,000 of those languages have some type of translation of the Bible, which makes it the most widely translated text in the world. That's a lot of interpretation on one text, which just shows the importance of a good translation. And the Bible's not the only example. There are so many books that are relevant today that are works of translation that we just don't think about. If we look back, historically, in antiquity, translators were essential in matters of trade, and eventually with the creation of the printing press, they held quintessential power. Today, we're going to look back in time and see how translation has been uniting individuals for thousands of years, which I think is pretty cool, because not only does it unite people today, but it connects us to the past, as people have been using this very similar techniques for thousands of years. The term translation in ancient Greek is metaphrasis, or speaking across, which in English sounds a lot like the word metaphrase, which sounds a lot like another word, paraphrase. Metaphrasis was to them an imperfect process. Direct translation could not occur because one word in a given language carries more than one meaning within that language, and thus is also represented by more than one word in the target language. John Dryden, an English poet and translator from the 17th century, took these concepts of metaphrase, paraphrase, and imitation and developed his theory. He concluded that within these three modes of phrasing, the overall concept of equivalence was the most important. Metaphrase, or literal translation, was awkward and limited the artistic input. Imitation gave way too much freedom, and thus paraphrasing, the center option, was the best. A concept which mirrored historical figures like Cicero and Horace, who had in the first century Rome cautioned against word-for-word translation. Equivalence is flexible but prudent, the key word being prudent, literal when possible, and only paraphrastic when absolutely necessary. When a target language lacks terms, translators can borrow terms, further enriching the target language. Thus, we can understand that two main ideals are constantly in conflict in translation: staying true to the document, or fidelity, which can mean accurately rendering the meaning of the original text in a way that can carry over, and transparency, which is the extent to which a native speaker would believe the text came from their own language, basically how good it hides the crossover from one language to another. Now that we have a general idea of the concepts translators have to take into account before they work, we can dive into an example from my own personal experience, and I can tell you a little bit about how it actually works. I had the opportunity to assist in the initial translation of the 2023 Nicaraguan novel Desventura, or Misfortune, written by Carly Gatton Morales, from Spanish to English, as well as work on the subsequent editing process. On a basic level, the story revolves around the murder of a young woman and the ensuing search to locate her killer. It reads almost as a media retelling, using newspaper articles and other such material like interviews to explain what really happened to her. But people live in history, and this, in the background of this story, is the conflict between the Somozas and the Sandinistas in Nicaragua, two competing political factions. The Sandinista National Liberation Front, or FSLN, originated in the early 1960s and sought to liberate Nicaragua from the repressive Somoza dictatorship and U.S. influence. The Somoza era, although marked by economic growth within the country, was one of inequality, political corruption, and strong connections to the United States, which many within the country resented. The conflict escalated in the mid-1970s when the FSLN began a kidnapping campaign, which forced the ruling Somozas to declare their country in a state of siege. In response, they used torture, rape, killings, intimidation, and press censorship to fight the Sandinistas. The Somoza regime would ultimately fall under pressure in 1979, but the next year, forces from Honduras, backed by the United States, were already mounting at the border. The Contra War, as it was called, would last until about 1990. Overall, it resulted in the deaths of over 50,000 people in Nicaragua and the displacement of over 600,000 from their homes, resulting in the movement of around 150,000 refugees to Honduras, Costa Rica, or the United States, all from a country that only has about 2 million people in it. This intense conflict lays the foundation for the life of the main character in Desventura. Her entire existence has been marred by the conflict. Her perspective is unique, but without translation, this text would be confined to Spanish. This intimacy into the everyday lives of ordinary individuals is what's so special about literature. Here, we get to see the consequences of a political regime in real time, coupled with a stringent class structure that she exists within. This creation of empathy between the reader and the writer is so important. The translation process that I was involved in was collaborative but extremely long. It was broken up into chunks, and I was responsible for translating about 2 to 3 pages a week as part of my honors contract for my Hispanic Civilization class, alongside another student, Annie Blevins, and our advisor, Dr. Saunders. Outside of my own knowledge, I used an online dictionary to help with certain words I didn't know, but after the initial translation from Spanish to English, the whole document was compiled and then edited. For the duration of a semester, I slowly worked through the newly translated English alongside Dr. Saunders, trying to further that concept of transparency or making the document sound more natural to a native English speaker. This was a really long, drawn-out process that involved working on it myself and then meeting with her to discuss the wordsmithing. The work was very detail-oriented, and it can definitely sometimes be difficult, especially when you're working with a piece that's written with older vocabulary. The greatest challenge, though, came with the dialogue. In the native Spanish, it wasn't marked, but in the translation to English, we decided that needed to happen. So we made an executive decision to include that in the new translation, but the amount of time it takes to complete the whole process was definitely the most surprising to me. After this experience, I can definitely say I have a new appreciation for those who do this as a career. It's very hard and full of a combination of little decisions that are constantly having to be made that can easily alter the meaning of a text. Many of my favorite books are works of translation, like War and Peace, but honestly, when you sit down and read something in English, unless it's blatantly obvious, I would definitely never think about the fact it could or was produced in another language. Reading is an amazing way to connect with other human beings, to learn something about another culture, or simply your own by surrounding yourself in it. People seem to say that a work is always best in its original language, that the true message of an author is only captured there. But the world is wide, and the literature produced is truly never-ending. I'll never be able to understand every language. No one ever will. But because of the profound work of translators, connection with different stories is possible for each and every one of us, and that is something to be grateful for. I hope you'll enjoy this episode of Cover to Cover. I hope to see y'all back next week.